Okay, so listen. Blake Lively once made a comment about wanting to meet Brad Pitt that has taken on a whole new meaning in hindsight. When an Instagram account revealed that Pitt had secretly filmed his Blink Can You'll Miss It cameo for Deadpool 2, Blake jumped into the comments with a playful jab at her husband, writing, "Weird. My husband didn't invite me to set that day. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than Blake trolling Ryan Reynolds." And considering the couple's long history of joking around on social media, that interpretation makes perfect sense. But Blake's fascination with Brad Pitt goes back much further than that comment. Years before the Deadpool 2 cameo, she had already spoken publicly about her admiration for the Hollywood star. So when you put that older history next to her 2021 comment, the joke suddenly becomes a lot more interesting and raises questions about whether there was more behind it than just a playful dig at her husband.
I just slept in the car on the way to Connecticut and went straight to work.
Wow.
So it was a busy time.
Did you ever see Brad Pitt? He's the executive producer.
Haven't met him yet.
No? He never showed up to see how his money was being spent?
Nope.
In October 2007, Blake Lively sat down for an interview with Cosmo Girl magazine. At the time, she was still a rising actress, just beginning to attract mainstream attention, and the public was only starting to learn who she was. But during that interview, she made a surprisingly blunt comment about Hollywood's biggest stars, saying, "Stars really are like anyone else." At the end of the day, Brad Pitt poops, as handsome as he may be, and so does Angelina Jolie on the surface. The media treated the remark as a simple observation that celebrities are ordinary people beneath all the fame and glamour. But looking back, some might interpret the choice to single out Brad Pitt as more interesting than it initially appeared. By mentioning one of Hollywood's most famous actors by name in a major magazine, Lively was placing herself in the same public conversation as him at a very early stage of her career. And because Pitt was already one of the biggest names in the world, the comment naturally attracted attention. Whether it was simply a joke about celebrity culture or something more deliberate is impossible to know, but it certainly became one of those early moments that people could later look back on and connect to her long-standing fascination with one of Hollywood's most famous stars.
The thing is, there is something insidious going on. I just can't quite figure out what it is and why we need to bring this to the public opinion.
At the time, Blake Lively was also dating her Gossip Girl co-star Penn Badgley. He was her real-life boyfriend, and their relationship was very much part of her public story. But what stands out is that when Blake spoke about Hollywood's biggest stars, her comments often seemed to gravitate toward famous leading men rather than focusing on her own relationship. Brad Pitt was one example, but another name that repeatedly came up was Leonardo DiCaprio. That pattern makes her early interviews more interesting in hindsight, especially when you consider how often her name would later become connected to some of Hollywood's biggest male stars.
Blake Lively was seen hanging out with newly single Leonardo DiCaprio again. Last year they were seen eating dinner, and now the two are spotted in Italy on a bit more of an intimate vacation.
Blake Lively seemed to understand very early on just how powerful the press could be, and she began making increasingly bold comments that kept her name in the same conversation as Brad Pitt. In March 2008, when a reporter asked who she was dating, she could have simply mentioned Penn Badgley. Instead, she jokingly replied, "I'm having Brad Pitt's baby." At the time, Brad Pitt was in a relationship with Angelina Jolie, who was pregnant with their child. So the joke was certainly provocative. Whether it was simply Blake's sense of humor or a deliberate attempt to get Pitt's attention, the comment guaranteed that her name would be associated with his in the media. But by August 2008, the conversation had shifted. Blake was becoming increasingly known for playing Serena van der Woodsen on Gossip Girl, a character whose romantic life was anything but innocent. In interviews, however, Blake seemed eager to make it clear that she was very different from Serena. She wanted the public to see her as private, grounded, and far more innocent than the character she portrayed. That image came through strongly in a major Cosmopolitan interview, where she discussed her own dating history. Blake explained that she had never experienced the kind of betrayal Serena went through, saying she had never done anything with her best friend's boyfriend. She also claimed that, outside of acting roles, she had only kissed 3 people in her entire life. Then came the line that brought Brad Pitt directly back into the conversation. Blake joked, "I hope Brad Pitt doesn't hear this. He's never going to want to marry me. On its own, that sounds like a playful celebrity crush. But when you put all of these comments together, it creates a much more intriguing timeline. Blake was repeatedly bringing up Brad Pitt's name while simultaneously presenting herself as the complete opposite of her Gossip Girl character. Whether she was genuinely trying to get Pitt's attention or simply having fun with the media, the strategy certainly kept people talking. And that is where the story gets even more interesting. In Hollywood, comments made by rising stars can travel surprisingly far through agents, managers, publicists, and industry connections. There is no reliable evidence that Brad Pitt personally followed Blake Lively because of these remarks, so claims about him secretly keeping tabs on her should be treated as speculation. What we can say is that Blake was becoming increasingly visible, and her repeated references to Pitt ensured that the connection between their names stayed in the public conversation.
Also remember that Ryan Reynolds was married to Scarlett Johansson when he started filming that movie, The Green Lantern, which everyone hated because it was terrible and it was horrible acting. But his co-star in that movie was Blake Lively. And then, wouldn't you know it, after that movie, Ryan and Scarlett, they got a divorce. I wonder how many years and how many kids it's going to be before Ryan is like, I wish I never laid eyes on her. One thing's for certain and two things for sure. The way you start something is exactly how you're going to end it. You started in a mess, it's going to end in a mess.
When Ryan Reynolds married Blake Lively, he wasn't simply marrying a rising Hollywood actress. He was marrying someone who had spent years making headlines with playful comments about some of the biggest male stars in the industry, including Brad Pitt. And that history adds another layer to the story of their relationship. Ryan Reynolds is known for being highly aware of Hollywood's publicity machine, and by the time he and Blake got married, he would have been familiar with the interviews and quotes that had followed her throughout her early career. From there, the couple carefully built a very specific public image, the hilarious Hollywood pair who constantly teased each other, exchanged sarcastic comments online, and appeared completely comfortable in the spotlight. That image became more than just entertainment. It helped create a protective layer around their relationship. The funny tweets, playful Instagram posts, public affection, and endless jokes made their marriage look almost untouchable. Instead of allowing the public to focus on old rumors or Blake's earlier celebrity comments, the narrative became about Ryan and Blake as Hollywood's favorite comedic couple. But claims that Ryan was secretly insecure, deliberately kept Blake away from Brad Pitt, or controlled their schedules to prevent them from crossing paths are not established facts. There is no reliable evidence that he created a deliberate barrier between Blake and Pitt. What is undeniable is that Hollywood eventually brought Ryan Reynolds and Brad Pitt into the same orbit. And when that finally happened, the playful comments from years earlier suddenly became much more interesting in hindsight.
And he just said, yeah, 2 seconds work, I'll be in front of a blue screen.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. He and Ryan called and why not?
The tension between these names, however, reached a new level during the production of Deadpool 2 in 2018. The film was especially important to Ryan Reynolds because he wasn't just the lead actor. He was also a writer and producer, giving him a major creative role behind the scenes. One of the movie's most memorable cameos involved a character called the Vanisher, an invisible member of the X-Force. For most of the film, audiences couldn't see him at all. Then, during a chaotic sequence, he accidentally hits a power line, is electrocuted, and briefly becomes visible before dying. And when the audience finally sees his face, it's Brad Pitt. Interestingly, Pitt had originally been considered for a much larger role. Early development reportedly included ideas for him to play Cable, and concept art was created showing what that version could have looked like. However, scheduling issues ultimately prevented him from taking the role. Pitt still wanted to make an appearance, though, and the filmmakers found a way to make it happen by giving him the Vanisher cameo. But that raises an obvious question. Why would one of Hollywood's biggest stars agree to appear on screen for only a few seconds without delivering a single line? The explanation given publicly was much simpler. Pitt reportedly liked the first Deadpool, his children were fans of the movie, and he thought the tiny cameo would be a fun joke. Ryan Reynolds has also spoken about how Pitt agreed to do the role in exchange for a very unusual payment. Some people have tried to reinterpret the cameo as something more personal, as if Pitt was deliberately using Deadpool 2 to enter Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' private world. But there is no credible evidence that Pitt took the role for that reason. The cameo is better understood as a Hollywood inside joke between actors and filmmakers. Still, the timing made the appearance especially intriguing. After years of Blake Lively publicly joking about Brad Pitt, the two Hollywood worlds finally collided on Ryan Reynolds' biggest project. And that is what makes the Deadpool 2 cameo such a fascinating chapter in this story.
What was shooting that like, and how did they pitch it to you?
What was shooting that like? Pretty much the easiest thing I've ever done.
Ryan understood that Brad Pitt's appearance could create an interesting dynamic, but as a producer, he also knew he couldn't simply turn down a cameo from one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. From a marketing perspective, having Pitt attached to Deadpool 2 was an opportunity that was almost impossible to ignore. So Ryan agreed to the cameo, but according to this version of the story, he wanted to keep the situation tightly controlled. The goal was to make the appearance funny, memorable, and beneficial for the movie without allowing it to become something more personal. Ryan had to balance the business opportunity with his own concerns, and he allegedly put certain boundaries in place to make sure the situation never went beyond the screen. Whether those boundaries actually existed is difficult to verify. But one thing is certain. Brad Pitt's tiny appearance became one of the most talked about surprises in Deadpool 2, and it brought together two Hollywood worlds that had been separate for years.
I don't put anything past A-list celebrities. I've worked with a lot of them. They are like Amazon, Facebook. They're run like corporations where people, like, they treat them like they're essentially a brand, right? Like when you think Brad Pitt, you think brand. So there's a lot of people in the behind the scenes working on making sure these brands are not tainted. Ryan Reynolds comes off as very like comfortable, funny, easy to work with. But what I've heard is that he's very controlling.
Brad Pitt's payment for appearing in Deadpool 2 became one of the strangest stories surrounding the cameo. Instead of accepting his usual multi-million-dollar paycheck, Pitt reportedly agreed to take the minimum SAG-AFTRA rate, which was around $1,000 at the time. But he supposedly had one unusual request: a cup of Starbucks coffee, personally delivered by Ryan Reynolds. The coffee story has become part of the legend surrounding Pitt's cameo, and Reynolds himself has talked about it publicly. But interpreting the request as Pitt deliberately humiliating Ryan or trying to establish some kind of personal dominance is speculation. There is no credible evidence that the coffee was intended as a power move or connected to Blake Lively. Still, the detail makes the story incredibly entertaining. Imagine one of Hollywood's biggest stars agreeing to appear for only a few seconds, accepting virtually no money, and asking the film's leading actor and producer to personally bring him a cup of coffee. It was the kind of absurd behind-the-scenes story that perfectly matched the humor of Deadpool. The more dramatic version of the story claims Ryan deliberately kept the cameo hidden from Blake because he feared she would want to visit the set and finally meet the actor she had joked about wanting to marry. But there is no reliable evidence that Ryan secretly kept Brad's appearance from Blake, arranged special security to keep them apart, or intentionally prevented her from coming to the set. What we do know is that Pitt's cameo was kept largely under wraps because the surprise itself was part of the joke. When the invisible vanisher was suddenly revealed to be Brad Pitt, audiences got one of the movie's most unexpected celebrity cameos. The rest, the idea that Ryan was secretly protecting his marriage by keeping Blake miles away, is a dramatic interpretation rather than an established fact.
Maybe the wind can't blow what it can't see.
Really? Brad Pitt filmed his brief scene. Deadpool 2 hit theaters, and his identity as the Vanisher became one of the movie's biggest surprises. For years, the cameo remained a funny behind-the-scenes story. But then an old Instagram post brought the entire moment back into the spotlight. The account shared a throwback photo of Pitt filming his scene and explained the famous coffee story. Instead of taking a traditional paycheck, Pitt had reportedly asked for a Starbucks coffee delivered personally by Ryan Reynolds. It was presented as nothing more than a fun piece of Deadpool 2 trivia for fans. But when Blake Lively came across the post, she responded with a comment that immediately grabbed people's attention. "My husband didn't invite me to set that date on the surface. It sounds like a playful complaint between husband and wife." But given Blake's long history of joking about Brad Pitt, some people interpreted the comment very differently. The implication was that Blake normally would have been happy to visit Ryan on set, yet somehow missed the one day when Brad Pitt happened to be there. That naturally led fans to speculate. Did Ryan deliberately keep the cameo from Blake, or was Blake simply joking about missing one of the movie's biggest celebrity surprises? There is no reliable evidence that Ryan intentionally kept her away from the set or that Blake was genuinely angry with him. Still, her comment became intriguing because it connected two separate pieces of Hollywood history: the years of Blake's playful Brad Pitt comments and Pitt's surprise appearance in Deadpool 2. Whether it was nothing more than a joke or a subtle tease directed at her husband, Blake's one sentence was enough to make people start looking at the old story from a completely different angle.
We were such good friends for so long, and when we both got to know each other, we got to know each other as friends. So when we were both single, we were still trying to find each other's, who would be good for you? You know, we'd sit around being like, do you know anyone? And it didn't click for, a good year and a half of like, oh, hey, wait, hold on. We could date.
Ryan Reynolds' response, at least according to this theory, unfolded in two very different stages. The first was what could be called a strategy of public deflection. Ryan understood that one of the easiest ways to take attention away from an awkward story is to bury it beneath humor, and that was already a major part of the couple's public image. After Blake Lively's comment about not being invited to the Deadpool 2 set began attracting attention, the couple continued leaning heavily into their familiar social media banter. Rather than directly addressing speculation about Brad Pitt, they kept the focus on their usual jokes, sarcastic exchanges, and playful public appearances. That approach allowed the conversation to shift away from the uncomfortable questions surrounding Pitt's cameo. Instead of giving the story more oxygen, the couple's online persona provided something else for fans and entertainment outlets to discuss. They had already built a reputation for constantly trolling each other, so another round of jokes didn't necessarily look unusual. From the outside, it simply appeared to be Ryan and Blake doing what they had always done. For example, their Valentine's Day exchanges often involved exaggerated or backhanded compliments, while Blake also shared playful content involving Ryan, including a quarantine-era video of him coloring or styling her hair, while joking about her relationship with her hairstylist. Those moments helped reinforce the image of a couple who were comfortable enough to publicly mock each other. Whether this was actually a deliberate strategy to bury the Brad Pitt discussion, however, is impossible to establish. There is no solid evidence that Ryan ordered his team to flood the internet with jokes or that the couple created those posts specifically to distract from Blake's comment. Still, the timing gave fans plenty to speculate about, and once the Brad Pitt connection entered the conversation, even a couple's most ordinary jokes started being interpreted through a completely different lens.
It was funny because for about a year after Green Lantern had come and gone and all that stuff, and we were both single, we went on a double date she was on a date with another guy and I was on a date with another girl, and that was the most awkward date for their respective part because we were just like fireworks coming across.
Behind closed doors, the more dramatic version of this story suggests Ryan Reynolds eventually had to confront an uncomfortable reality. Blake Lively's old fascination with Brad Pitt had become part of the mythology surrounding their relationship. After years of marriage and building a family together, her comment about missing Pitt's Deadpool 2 cameo gave people a reason to revisit those old interviews and wonder whether her fascination had ever truly disappeared. Ryan may have successfully kept the two stars from interacting on that particular day, but there is no evidence that he was secretly trying to protect his marriage from Brad Pitt. The same is true of the coffee story. Pitt reportedly agreed to the cameo for the minimum payment and requested a Starbucks coffee delivered by Ryan Reynolds, but there is no credible evidence that the request was intended as a personal power move or a message directed at Blake. Still, the symbolism makes for a compelling Hollywood story. Imagine the scene. One of the industry's biggest stars arrives on Ryan Reynolds' set, agrees to appear for only a few seconds, accepts virtually no money, and asks Ryan to bring him a cup of coffee. On paper, it's simply a funny story about a celebrity cameo. But once Blake's old Brad Pitt comments are added to the equation, fans can easily turn that harmless moment into something far more dramatic. The coffee wasn't necessarily a declaration of dominance, and Ryan handing it to Pitt wasn't proof of humiliation or submission. Those interpretations go beyond what the available facts establish. But years later, Blake's Instagram comment gave the entire story a second life. One simple sentence, "My husband didn't invite me to set that day," was enough to reopen the conversation and send fans digging back through years of interviews, jokes, and Hollywood trivia. The cameo may have lasted only seconds. The coffee may have cost almost nothing. But the story surrounding it lasted for years, and Blake's comment became the moment when that old Hollywood joke suddenly spilled back into public view. The idea that Ryan had somehow planned the situation without Blake's knowledge would completely change the way some people interpret their carefree public image. What had always looked like harmless trolling and playful chemistry could suddenly seem much more complicated. But it's important to remember that this interpretation is based on speculation, not confirmed evidence. So, what do you guys think? Now that you know the full story behind Blake's Instagram comment, does it change the way you look at Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively's relationship? Do you think Ryan was right to keep Brad Pitt's cameo private, or was Blake's reaction completely understandable? Let me know what you think in the comments. Was it just another joke between Ryan and Blake, or was there something more behind that famous comment?